you very much. Fellow mariners, I thank you for the kind invitation to share some of my experiences as a fellow sailor, a marine surveyor, and a navigator. The event that was responsible for my being here tonight was in the true spirit of maritime camaraderie. One of your members afforded me a great kindness in providing a battery and jumper leads at a time when I was severely pressed by both appointment obligation and indifferent health. It remains to be seen who got the better deal. Uh, when he rang me, we were on a very poor line, and of course we've been talking about navigation, but when he rang me, he said, "Oh, now I want you to talk about sex." I didn't hear the tent after it, and so it was my actual intention to stand up and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure," and sit down again. But the cruising yachtsman or yachtswoman earns my utter respect, albeit the vessels these days represent a vastly different experience than most of us cut our teeth on. The conditions, both good and bad, remain fundamentally the same, and the problems faced every bit as harrowing. I've had the pleasure of sailing most of the oceans of the world, with one notable omission, and that is the North Atlantic. Though having had a fair share of its southern reaches, that same ocean, perhaps I should be careful what I wish for. I am permitted, if the myth be reliable, to pee to weather. An experience, I can assure you, still results in wet socks. We all have tales to tell, and a little anecdote I would like to share with you involved a pair of rather large pink bifocal glasses. Like most cruisers, we used to pick up the odd bit of freight on the way around to supplement the cruising budget. And in this particular case, we got 3 young Americans, came aboard in Vila, and they wanted to sail up the chain to Santo and the Banks Islands and then on to the Solomons. We explored the various islands, dived on wrecks, and did all those things that make cruising life unique. Like all good things, our time at Tulagi eventually came to an end, and one girl had to fly out of Honiara the coming Monday morning. Come departure time, she had misplaced her specs and reluctantly had to leave minus them. One rule maintained on any vessel of which I am the master is that every Thursday the vessel gets cleaned from deckhead to cabin sole, new linen issued, everyone has a bath or shower whether they want it or not, and it generally to maintain the health, a healthy environment on the vessel. I assured our departed glass that their glasses would be found, and when we got to a reliable mailing port, I would send them back. I must say I'm profoundly ashamed that I never did that. We set off down from the Solomons, down through the Trobriands to the Louisiade archipelago, then on to Australia. The specs were found and placed on the bookshelf in the saloon for safekeeping. We anchored off an impressive white sand beach in the Trobriands. Tuma Island was the name of the spot, when a canoe came out bearing 2 mismatched individuals. Not one word was spoken while a strapping young man carried the smallest adult human being I'd ever seen in my life over the side of the boat, across the deck, into the cockpit, down the companionway, and he sat this old fellow in the middle of our table. Pidgin English established that the old fellow was a paramount headman and had been educated in Port Moresby by missionaries. He said he used to be able to read before the light gone out in his eyes. The cataracts in his eyes were obvious. At a whim, I reached for the pink bifocals and placed them on his nose. They looked hilarious, but his face had dissolved into a sea of delighted wrinkles. He pulled a copy of the Bible out of the bookshelf and read a few lines. What could I do? Insist that he have them. So armed with the specs and the Bible, he took his leave, but not before promising, for us promising not to leave before he came back in the morning. The sizable community must have worked all night, because the next morning This armada of canoes came out, laden with all manner of goodies. There were live pigs, chickens, fish, and all manner of fruit and vegetable. Basket upon basket was handed up until our deck resembled a farmer's market, and another 20 canoes waiting to discharge their lot. I had to call enough, not knowing what the hell I was going to do with all the stuff we already had. The remaining canoes parted to allow the old chap, resplendent in pink specks, to once again be hefted aboard. It carried below. He handed me a very heavy cloth-wrapped parcel, which contained a stone nusu. I knew what it was, as I had a collection of the damn things carved out of ebony and set with fine mother of pearl that everyone gets caught with in the Solomons. Ever been there? A nusu is the head and shoulders of a man holding the head of another man between his hands. In days gone by, earlier generations, when they went headhunting, would have one of these set in a notch in the front of their canoe. I had, in all truth, never seen a stone one, and I guessed it to be very old. It was accepted with humility, as I have several stone adzes and appreciate the sheer amount of time and effort that it goes in to fashioning such a sculpture with stone tools. We got underway as soon as possible, hoping to make another landfall where I could dispense some of our ill-gotten gains. Particularly the livestock, as the squeals of the trussed-up pigs and chooks was a bit hard to take. Even though nearly dark when we reached the next island, a canoe came out and inquired if I was the man that had put the glass in the chief's eye. As we were travelling faster than any other boat in the region, it's a total mystery as to how the news had preceded our arrival. We and much of our livestock were ferried ashore to a feast of magnificent proportions. This was to be the first of many such occasions, right to and including the Louisiades, always the news having got there first. Australia eventually beckoned and we made our first stop in Cairns. 2 days later, a boffinish-looking fellow from the Brisbane University turned up, asking to see our nusu. He was ecstatic about it, claiming it to be circa 400 years old. I was on the brink of asking if they would like to borrow it to study when he made an error of judgment that got my hackles up. Of course, we'll buy it, he stated. It was a gift, I said. It's not for sale. Everything is for sale at a price. We'll pay you $5,000. Sorry, the idiot in me replied. It is not for sale. We may go to 7,000, he added. I bit my tongue and turned him down, suggesting he leave before my resolve weakened. We were in fiscal straits, not far off penury at the time. However, honour and nusu intact, we set sail for New Calland home. Like most of us returning from a long cruise, the question arises as to what to do with all the bits and pieces we collect. Most wind up in boxes out of sight and out of mind. My nusu wound up as the doorstop or my mother's back door, and I never had the heart to tell her she had a 7 grand doorstop. My time as a surveyor of ships covered a very interesting period in that SSM, or Safe Ship Management, came into being. Up until that time, surveyors were solely concerned with the physical condition of ships and their equipment. The new component introduced by SSM meant that operator competence was also put under scrutiny. Manual covering pre-voyage checks, emergency procedures, safe navigation, maintenance, man overboard and fire drills, grounding and down flood. They were all covered and had to be created by the skipper owner. While we could give them a draft layout, we couldn't produce it for them as we had to later audit the manuals, and it would have been unethical to audit one's own work. A major difficulty arose primarily with our fishing fleet, and that many of our skippers had left school at 14 to join dad or granddad on his trawler. Their education continued, albeit the lectures delivered with a clout around the ears or a kick up the bum, regardless of which most became reasonably competent skippers. But academics they certainly were not. The other main impediment was that most Kiwis run things till they break. and the concept of preventative maintenance not readily accepted. We were required to audit procedures by questioning who does what when an incident or accident occurs. A favourite question of mine was to ask what was the first thing you would do in the event of a fire in the forepart of your ship. I'm still amused by the variety of answers, which range from shouting fire to playing an extinguisher at the seat of the blaze. Surely I would suggest the first thing you would do is to turn downwind and take weight off your vessel. Hello. I seem to have lost a page. Never mind. That was the best way to avoid the fire being driven the length of the vessel. At least you weren't getting smoke and ash in your eyes when you had to try and put the damn thing out. That having been said, and I still believe it important, it's as important for this association today as it was for the SSM in those early introductions, was that it is far better to educate than to legislate. In other words, if you have a skill or a skill set, pass it on, share it, enjoy it. Last little tale just involves navigating. We had 5 rather young midshipmen standing up on the bridge of the Waikato at a given point of time, and they were going through their morning sextant drill. I would come out through the nav shack onto the deck, having just acquired the last reported position. Now, we all understand the importance of DR, and the practice of DR is a wonderful thing because the more you practice it, the more practiced you become about it. Also, as far as using a sextant goes, of course, the more accurate the DR as you go into the process, the more likely is the result at the end. So DR is something that you got to learn and practice. So between the nav shack and waiting for these fellows to finish, I would stand there and go like this, and then look at my watch and write down a position and tuck it into one of their pockets and say, tell me how close I got. And they would go away and do their workout, invariably wind up with 5 different answers, but however, we're reasonably close. And I'd come back and say, what's the secret of this? And I said, well, now, an old Norwegian seaman taught me to navigate with my thumb and forefinger. And he said, before you die, pass it on to 2 worthy men. I said, I haven't met them yet. Not one ever questioned the fact that it was total bullshit. Folks, I thank you for your forbearance and having to put up with my droning. I'll now pass you back to your worthy MC, and I do thank you for your hospitality and your kindness, and announce my intention to join you in the future.